Welcome to everything you always wanted to know about Excel, but were afraid to ask. This is Lesson 11, Pivot Tables. Here's what you'll need for this lesson. Microsoft Excel 2016 or newer. This lesson's example file. Speakers or headphones. And ideally at least 2 monitors. Here's what we'll learn in this lesson. Pivot tables, including creating and configuring pivot tables, adding calculated fields, and formatting data in pivot tables. We'll also look at pivot charts. So what is a pivot table? A pivot table is a built-in tool in Excel that allows you to easily summarize and analyze large amounts of data. Pivot tables take large data sets, sometimes hundreds or thousands of rows, and roll them up or summarize them into statistics about the data. There are 2 major constructs we're going to talk about when it comes to pivot table data: fields and areas. A field is any column in your data source or spreadsheet. Those fields get categorized into areas, and there are 4 areas that your fields can be used in: rows, values, columns, and filters. Let's take a look at those. Now in the bottom left-hand corner, we have the rows area. Any fields that you drag to the rows area show up as rows in your pivot table, or sub-rows in your pivot table. Next, on the top right, we have columns. Any fields that you drag to columns show up as columns in your pivot table. In the bottom right-hand corner, we have values. This is where the magic happens, because this is where the data gets rolled up or summarized into statistics. Values can be a count or a sum or an average, any sort of aggregate of your data. And finally, we have filters up in the top left-hand corner. This allows you to choose which data gets included in your pivot table. So let's look at a couple of examples of how we can use pivot tables to help us summarize some large sets of data and to maybe help us analyze that data in ways that are a little more tricky when you're not using a pivot table. Okay, so the first data set here on the tab labeled t-shirts, that's actually, this is a list of every t-shirt I own. And I think by last count there were 368 of them. Yeah, that's right, 368. So more than enough to wear a different t-shirt every day for the entire year. That's a lot of t-shirts, and it's a lot of data. And there's some cool stuff I could do with this with a pivot table, so let's go ahead and do that. So the way we start to make a pivot table is we're going to select all of the data that we want to include in the pivot table. Now I just hit Control A and selected everything. If there were some columns out here that were not contiguous, then I would have just selected them manually, but this worked. So it's always important to make sure your data has headers. So I've got a header row here. We've got the description, which is just the name of the t-shirt, a category, a shirt color, and where that shirt is right now. So we're going to select all our data, and on the Insert tab up on the ribbon, we're going to click Pivot Table. And you can see it's put a little green border, little moving green border around my data. that shows that it's selected the correct data. If it didn't, I can go in here and edit the range or the table that's being selected. And it gives us the option to either put this pivot table in a new worksheet or in an existing worksheet. We're just going to stick with new worksheet and click OK. And this is going to take us over to a new worksheet, which I'm going to just name T-shirt pivot. Okay, so now you can see that when I click anywhere in this this area, this pivot table area, this pivot table fields context menu appears over on the right-hand side of the screen. That's kind of where all the magic happens. So we've got our 4 columns, our 4 fields: description, category, shirt color, and location. And I'm just going to add the category. I'm going to take this category field. I can check the box, and it's going to automatically add it to the rows area down at the bottom. Or I'm able to drag this down to the rows area or the columns area or anywhere I want. So you can see when I add it to rows, what it's going to do is add 1 row with each unique or distinct category. So you can see there's however many categories. There's 16 different categories of shirts that the 368 shirts fall into. Okay, and we're able to see that, but that's not anything that exciting. We could have done that a number of other ways in Excel, just get all of the unique values. But now here's where the fun part starts. Okay, so we're going to take another field here. It actually doesn't matter which one we use in this case, but I'm going to use description. And we're going to pull that down to values. If I just check it, it's probably going to add it. Yeah, it's just going to add it to row and create a sub row. You can see a list of every shirt under each category, which might be useful or pretty cool, but not as exciting as doing this. So I'm going to take description and just, actually I'll drag it from here over to values. And you can see now that it's going to tell me how many different shirt descriptions, how many different shirts basically, fall into each of these categories. So there's, I have 15 baseball shirts and I have 44 Disney shirts. I'm actually wearing one of those today. And so on. So that's cool. We can also rename this column. So right now it says count of description. It's always going to say, what kind of aggregate is being used. So count or sum or average, min, max, etc. Of, and then the column name or the field name. But we're just going to change that because it's not really a count of description. It's the number of shirts. So to do that, we just click on the column name down here in the fields area and choose value field settings. Now, if this were numeric data, we could also choose to add it or average it or multiply it, all of these different options that appear here. But count is what we want in this case. And in this case, we're just going to change our name up here where it says custom name. We're going to change that to say shirts. So this will tell us because this tells us the number of shirts that fall into each of these categories. Now, this is all pretty cool, right? But we could have done this with a simple COUNTIF function. And it would have been maybe even faster. So, why did we do this? Well, here's where it gets a little more interesting, right? I alluded to it before, you saw it a little bit, But in addition to adding a row, we can now add a sub-row. So we're going to do that. We're going to take shirt color, and we're going to pull it down to rows. And what this is going to do is it's going to add a sub-row underneath the category row. So now, not only can I see that I have 15 baseball shirts, but I can also see that they are, 2 of them are black and 3 of them are blue, and so on and so forth. Now, right now, everything here is alphabetical, but it doesn't have to be. We can also sort this data by numerically. The way we do that is we click on the row or the category that we want to sort. So if I want to sort my category, my shirt category, but I want to sort by this column, I right-click on it and choose Sort Largest to Smallest. So this is going to pull the shirt category with the most shirts up to the top. And apparently I have 62 shirts that fall into the musicals category. And I can do the same thing with the sub-row. I can click on any of the sub-rows and sort largest to smallest. And it's not just going to sort this top one, it's going to sort all of them. So like you can see when I come down to Disney, the most common colored Disney shirt I have is blue. And that checks out with what I'm wearing today. Now, in addition to being able to sort these by color or by the number of, or by category, by the number of shirts, I'm also able to, you can see we can expand or collapse each of these. So maybe for some of these we don't want to see the sub rows. You can do that on individual rows, but you can also right-click and choose Expand Collapse and collapse the entire field. So maybe I want to just show a summary or a roll-up for each of these categories, except my Mets shirts. I just want to look at, I want to present it this way. I have Mets shirts in all of these colors, and I find it hard to believe actually that I only have 4 orange Mets shirts, but the data doesn't lie. So that's another thing that we're able to do. We're also able to, again, without adding any additional fields, we're also able to filter on any of these criterion. So I'm just going to expand this all again so we can see everything we're working with. Now, somewhere in here, there's a blank color. I don't know why, but there is. Let's assume that we might have some data like that, but that we don't want to include it in our pivot table. So we're currently showing all 368 shirts. But let's say I don't want to show anything that's blank. What I can do is click on the row, any of the color rows, and then use the filter header up here, which we should all be familiar with from previous lessons. And I can unselect anything that I don't want to include. So I want to get rid of blank. And you know what? Tie-dye is not really a color either, so that's kind of cheating. So we'll get rid of tie-dye. And that will remove those. So now instead of all 368 shirts, we're only looking at 365. And again, I could do the same thing with categories. So if I just click on any of these categories and then again use the filter head to select miscellaneous isn't really a category. It's just the lack of a category. So I'm going to get rid of that and click OK. And now I'm down to just showing the 322 shirts that have both a category and a real color. So that's really, everything with the filtering. A couple other things that I want to show before we play around with the fields a little bit more. So we've got these totals up here. Are 62 and 44 and everything like that. We're able to show these numbers if we wanted to. Instead of just showing them as numbers, we could show them as a percent of the whole. So there's two main ways that we would do that. One of them is showing everything as a percent of the grand total. So if I right-click, there's a show values as, and we'll choose percent of grand total. And this is going to show me that, 19.25% of my shirts are musical shirts, or 10% are meth shirts, almost 11%. And the numbers on the overall rows are going to add up to 100%. So if I collapse everything, this is going to add up to 100%. These sub rows are going to be percentage of the whole as well. So these won't add up to 100%. These will add up to 19.25%. So what this says is that 4% of all my shirts are black musical shirts. And 1.24% of all my shirts are orange Mets shirts. So that's how you would read that. The other thing that we could do instead of percent of grand total is percent of parent total. So if we right click again and go to show values as percent of parent row total. So that's not going to change this top row. That's still 19% of all my shirts. But what it's going to do is make everything under this row, everything in the sub row, as a percentage of the total number of musical shirts. So now I can say 20%, 20.97% of my musical shirts are black, or 11% of my Mets shirts are orange, and Mets shirts still make up 10.87% of all my shirts. So now we're going to add one more field here, and that's the location field. So I'm actually going to add this as a row, and you can see now it adds again as a sub row. And this shows you where these shirts are. Anything that's in my dresser, these are things I wear normally, and then the rest of the shirts are, elsewhere. But this is kind of an annoying way to look at this data. These, going from category to color to location. So what I want to do is actually start with location. I want that to be my main row, and then have, I think, the color and then the category. Drill down in that order. So that's easy enough to do. All we have to do is drag these rows to a different order. The top one is your main row, and then everything under that is a sub row and a sub row of the sub row. So we're going to start with location, and then color, and then category. And let's just collapse everything. Oops. Collapse everything. And I have one shirt in my car, I think. I keep a spare shirt in my car. Never hurts. So that's the location on that one. But let's say we only want to look at shirts that are in the dresser. And now you can see instead of category and then color, or category and color and location, we've now got the location is first, and then the color. And then you can see actually the category as a percentage of each color. So, maybe only a small percentage of my Mets shirts are orange, but I bet a high percentage of my orange shirts, 50% of my orange shirts are Mets shirts. So, that's not terribly surprising as these things go. So, I'm actually going to remove location now. And we're going to look at one more of the areas by taking shirt color and moving it from rows over to columns. So what this is going to do is it's going to take our data that's kind of been growing vertically, and instead it's going to grow our data horizontally. And so we're just going to grab that. We're going to grab color and pull it over to columns. And now you can see instead of sub-rows, we've got columns that tell us the different shirt colors and what percentage of them belong to each category. I'm going to actually switch this just back to numbers. To do that, we choose Show Values as No Calculation. And that's going to show me all my things as numbers again. So it's pretty easy to just say, okay, I have 3 blue baseball shirts, or I have, 15 blue Mets shirts, 4 black Mets shirts. I've been trying to get rid of those over the years now that it's not one of their colors anymore. So the last thing here that kind of still bothers me about this chart is I really don't like the blank spaces. And so the way we can fix that is by right-clicking anywhere in our chart and choosing Pivot Table Options. And in the Pivot Table Options dialog box, there's a bunch of tabs. We're really only going to deal with layout and format for right now. In the Format section on the Layout and Format tab, we have an option for what to show for empty cells. Now, that's, it's just blank right now. That's what we're showing for empty cells. If there's no, brown camp shirts, then it's just going to show nothing. But I'd rather show a 0. So we're going to go in here and click, just type a 0, make sure this box is checked, and hit OK. And that's going to make it look a little bit more normal, a little less like weird and sparse. And notice that when I switched to columns, my filters are still active, so I'm still only showing 322 of my shirts. I can clear those filters. Still don't like blank. We're going to figure out what that's about later. And now you can see all of the shirts, all in one pivot table. So this is kind of what I meant before when I said that we're able to take large amounts of data. This is only 300 and something, 368 rows, but that's large. You can't read that and interpret it directly without spending a whole lot of your time. So that's kind of what I mean when you're able to take large amounts of data and summarize them or pull statistics from them. In this case, our statistics are as simple as, there are 3 yellow Disney shirts. So that's everything we're going to look at with the t-shirt data. Moving along now to the next tab, which is labeled Alonso. So for those of you who aren't baseball fans, this isn't going to be as exciting as it will for people who are baseball fans. But bear with me. I'll try to explain everything that I'm doing and why and what it all means. And you should be able to learn just as well as anybody else. You just may not find it as exciting. So what I've done here is the New York Mets have a first baseman named Pete Alonso. Last season was his first year playing in Major League Baseball. And what I did was I took every single at-bat that Alonso had in 2019. Every single one. Or every plate appearance, rather. There's 693 of them. And, I thought this would be a fun way to get a large data set that we could play with and demonstrate some things. Baseball is a game of statistics, and there's a lot of math and a lot of statistics that come out of a baseball season, and I thought we could take this data set and have sort of a microcosm of that, looking at one player's season. So this is I'm not going to go into what every one of these fields is, and we're not actually going to use every one of these fields. The reason I've brought all of this in is it's going to allow you some more practice if this is the kind of data source that you do like. After we're done and after this lesson is over, you'll be able to take this data and play around with it some more in perhaps some interesting ways. So we're going to, again, start the same way. We're just going to make a pivot table. Control A to select all of the data here, and then insert pivot table. Again, we're going to start in a new worksheet, and we're going to hit OK. So this brings us again to our pivot table fields, and the very first thing we're going to do is add the date to our rows area. Now you see, as soon as I clicked that, Excel automatically figured out that these are dates, and it automatically rolled them up into months, which is awesome. So that can be very useful. You can see, there's only 3 days in March that Pete Alonso had plate appearances, and so on and so forth. If I didn't want these to be rolled up into months, I could easily ungroup them by right-clicking on any of these dates and selecting ungroup. And that's just going to take me out to, every single date that was included in our data set. I can also group them by different, different groupings. By right-clicking and selecting group, we bring up our grouping dialog box. And in this case, I'm going to unselect months. Months will allow me to select multiple things. So, for example, I could group by quarter and then month. This isn't a useful distinction for baseball stats, but it's a useful distinction for sales data or anything like that. So we're actually going to choose, instead of quarters and months, we're going to group these into groups of weeks. So if I select days, it's going to allow me to select the number of days. And I'm going to choose 7. And you'll see that I'm able to, put this into groups as weeks. Now, the funny thing is, I just did all of that just to demonstrate it, but really I kind of did prefer months. So we're going to go back to months. And, just months. We don't need the months and then days underneath it, which is what we had before. We're just doing months. This is good enough. So continuing on, the next thing, the most basic stat that we can pull out of this data is the number of hits that Pete Alonso got in each of these in each month. So we're going to take hit and we're going to bring that over to values. And the way I had created this data is every at-bat either resulted in a hit, either resulted in 0 hits, or 1 hit. Those are the options. So I'm able to then add those all together and determine how many hits Pete Alonso had in each of those months. So that's why we're doing sum here. Previously we had done count. If we do count, that's really going to give me every single row, including the zeros. And so that's plate appearances, it's not hits. So that's why we have the sum. And while we're in here, we're just going to label this hits instead of hit ? Okay, so this gives us the number of hits that Pete Alonso got in each of those months. Now let's do something we haven't done yet. We've looked at 3 of the different areas down in our pivot table settings, but we haven't done anything with filters yet. Now, this is different from the row filters and column filters that we looked at for the t-shirt data, because this is a filter that applies to the overall data before we even calculate any of our statistics. So I'm going to take the home and away field, and I'm going to drag it to filters. And you'll see it adds a new filter up top here. Now, I'm able to select all, which is what I currently have. And it shows me all 155 hits that Alonso got last year and what month they were in. Or I can filter by just the hits from away games, games that were not at Citi Field. And there were 93 of them at away games. And or I could look at just the ones for home games. And there were 62 hits at home games. So this is, that's how filters work. You're able to apply multiple filters. So, for example, I could pull the division. That's which division the team they were playing against is in, and filter based on that as well. I only want to look at home games against the National League East, which is the Mets' home division. And you can see the number of hits that Alonso got there. But I also wanted to demonstrate the reason I pulled this down in here. This will only let you select one option. If you want to select multiple options, you have to click the Select Multiple Items checkbox down here. And then you can filter based on, let's look at just games against interleague opponents. And he got 17 hits against interleague opponents. So that's how filtering works. It's very similar to how filtering works throughout the rest of Excel, but with that small nuance of it kind of appears up here, and by default you can only select one option or the all option above. So that's the filtering. The next thing I want to talk about is calculated fields. So I mentioned before baseball is a game of statistics, and one of the most basic statistics in baseball is batting average. The batting average of a player is the number of hits they got divided by the number of official at-bats that they got. And so we have all the data we need here to figure that out. We know we have hits, and we know we have official at-bats. But instead of showing them like this and then having to do the math or add our own column, what we're going to do is add a calculated column. So anytime you're clicking in your pivot table, you should see pivot table tools appear up here, and two new tabs appear on your ribbon. One of those is the Analyze tab. Now, we're not going to spend much time in the Design tab. The Design tab is mostly things that we covered when we were talking about tables, regular tables. So we're going to spend most of our time here in the Analyze tab. I don't like what I did there. Spend a little more time in here to do this. That's better. Okay, so to add a calculated field, on the Analyze tab in the ribbon, we're going to go to Fields, Items, and Sets. And we're going to choose Calculated Field. Okay, so in order to add a calculated field, we give it a name. In this case, it's going to be batting average. And we're going to give it a formula. So the way this works is we can use any of these fields that we have. We can also use any other, any other formula in Excel. We can use any numerical value, and we can use any of the operators that we've discussed previously. So in this case, like I said, this is a really simple one. Batting average is the number of hits a player has. So we're going to click Hit and Insert Field, divided by the number of official at-bats. So you can also double-click on a field here to add it there. So that's what I did. So hits divided by official at-bats equals batting average. And we're just going to hit OK. And this is going to give us Pete Alonso's batting average for each of those months. Now, if you know baseball at all, you know that this is normally summarized to 3 decimal points. So we're going to just fix that real quick. Once again, if we click on Sum of Batting Average down in the Values area, and then choose Value Field Settings, we're going to come up with this Value Field Settings dialog box. Now, I'm going to rename this to just Batting Average. And one thing to note is that you can't name it the same thing as an existing field. So that's why I've chosen to just abbreviate average. And I'm good with sum, and that's where we want to be. So we're just going to change number formatting. And this is going to bring up the cell formatting dialog box that you're familiar with just the Numbers tab. And then we're going to choose number, 3 decimal places, hit OK, and OK. And now we've got the batting average in a format that baseball fans can read and understand. So that's how we add a custom calculated field. And, this is going to always recalculate whenever we change anything else. So, like, for example, if we were to go back in here and group by week again, you can see Alonso's batting average by week. And, he did really, really well, hit right out of the gate, first week of the season, and had some other really hot streaks, and some less hot streaks throughout the season. So that's pretty cool. I'm just going to very quickly show you one thing is I've been clicking fields up in the pivot table fields area, and Excel makes some assumptions every time I do, and so far they've been right. But that's not always the case. For example, I have the inning field here. This tells you what inning an at-bat or a plate appearance occurred in. And if I click that, it's going to see that that's numerical data, and it's going to add it together. Now, that's not what we want. That's not going to be useful by any stretch of the imagination. So, I might want... I definitely don't want that there. I might want it by a column, probably here. So you could see Alonso's stats, his batting average by inning. That might be an interesting thing to see. You can also note that when I do this, there's some innings that he had no at-bats in. He didn't have any fifth inning at-bats in March, for example. And if you recall, before we went into pivot table options and dealt with empty cells, we can also deal with error values in that same spot. And so, you can see that's a little bit cleaner. But yeah, the key thing here is obviously Excel often knows what it's doing, but it doesn't always know what it's doing. And we should be very careful, not to assume when I check inning and it goes into values and adds it together. We should be careful not to assume that Excel always knows best. So I'm going to add a couple more calculated fields very quickly, and you'll see why in a moment. What I'm trying to demonstrate. But another stat that you might see in baseball is slugging percentage, and the slugging percentage is the number of bases divided by the number of official at-bats. And that needs to also be 3 decimal points. And another very common stat is on-base percentage. And that is a little more complicated, but I kind of made it simple here. It's basically the number of times the player reached base divided by the number of official opportunities they had to reach base. The reason it's complicated is because the opportunities doesn't include errors and certain sacrifice things. So we're going to add that. And again, just make it 3 decimal places. And now we come to the reason why I did those two additional stats. And that is to demonstrate that you can build calculated fields off of other calculated fields. So we do that really exactly the same as how we created our first calculated fields. One stat that's become very popular in the last few years is OPS, which is literally on-base percentage plus slugging percentage. So, so we're going to just create a new field that is slugging plus on-base percentage, and we're going to call it OPS. And you can see that already it already inherited the formatting from the two previous fields. But so you're able to create these fields based on other calculated fields that you've made. And one other thing that I want to show here before we move on to our final example is that now that we've created all these calculated fields, and you can see, they're fairly complex, you may, when you create calculated fields in your own work, you may want to show your work, essentially. Show people what you have, what these fields mean. And so that's actually really easy to do in Excel. Now that we've created all of our calculated fields, right up in the Fields, Items, and Sets button in the Analyze tab, we can just click List Formulas. And that's going to create a whole new tab and explain what all of those formulas are. So you can see it's going to tell you batting average equals hits divided by official at-bats, and so on and so forth, so that people who are using your pivot table can understand how you arrived at the different numbers if you want them to. And this is a static page; it just creates it once. So if you choose to, for example, if something is proprietary and you don't want them to know how it's calculated, you can just delete it from here and not include it in your data. And that can happen anytime you have proprietary internal statistics that you use or algorithms that you use that you want to display the result of, but you don't want necessarily people to know how you did it. So that's everything we're going to cover on the Pete Alonso sheet here. I will say that if you like baseball, or you like statistics, or you like playing around with things, there are a lot of cool fields in here that you can add. I've added all kinds of stuff. You can find out, whether Alonso did better in domed stadiums versus non-domed stadiums, or the ever popular righties versus lefties debate, and all sorts of other stats that you can play around with if you're so inclined. Day games versus night games. You can see a much better OPS on night games for whatever reason. So I'm, giving you kind of all of this extra data. After you're done watching this lesson, spend some time playing with it. Feel like you, so you can feel like you understand how, how to mess around with the different areas here and the different data. So now we're going to look at our final example on the Expenses tab. And instead of adding a pivot table, this time we're actually going to add a pivot chart. So the way a pivot chart works is it's just like the charts and graphs that we learned about a few lessons back, but it's based on pivot data instead of raw data. So, for example, if I tried to add a regular chart for this data, this is my expense data again for 2019 in a few categories, a few select categories, pulled out of my budget spreadsheet exported from Mint. So if I just tried to add like a regular chart here, you'll see very quickly what the problem is. The problem is going to be that I might crash Excel. The problem is going to be there's way too much data and it's not in the format that would make this useful. So our solution to that, as our solution with any large set of data, is to pivot. So to add a pivot chart, we go to the Insert tab, and instead of the Pivot Table button we've been clicking, we're going to click Pivot Chart. And again, we're going to get this same dialog box. We're going to hit OK. And this is going to insert the same pivot table looking thing and a little chart area for us to play around with. So here, this is kind of a simple data set. That's intentional. And we're just going to add the dates here. Notice with only one column, we are not going to see anything here in our chart area. And then we're going to add the categories. Still can't see anything in our chart area because we don't have anything in values. But you can see we've got our dates. I'm actually going to just take date out of here and keep months. So we've got our dates and our categories under date. And finally, we're going to add amount. It's the amount I spent. This should sum, so it's going to be in values. And you can see across these however many categories we have here, a chart of the total amount spent per month. Now, you'll notice this area down here where we configure our pivot table. It's a little bit different than it was, or it will be a little bit different. You'll see in a moment than it was in our previous setup, because instead of columns, when we're dealing with a chart, we don't have columns. We have a legend or series. So you'll see how that works in a moment. But for now, we're going to keep treating this just like a regular pivot table. We're going to add the category as a filter. Okay, so now you can see, in addition to the filter up here, like we had before, there's also a filter added to the top of our chart. And I want to select multiple items because I just want to look at utilities. I just want to see what I spent on gas, electric, and water throughout the year. And you can see it kind of moves like this. Spent a little bit less at the in the mid-temp months. Probably used more gas for heating in the winter months. Probably used more electricity for cooling in the summer months. And so in the in the mild months, it's spent a little bit less money. So that's how filters work with charts. It's worth pointing out also that we can do all of the things that we did with charts a few lessons back. We can do all of them with a pivot chart. So I can change this title, for example, to I can also add chart elements, so I can label my axes, I can change the settings on the axes the same way that I did on regular charts. We're not going to go into all of that again because we did it, and you don't need to hear me repeat myself. So the last thing that I think is really interesting here is, as I mentioned, the legend or series area. Instead of filtering, perhaps I want to have categories show up as different series. So when I do that, it actually still allows me, as you can see, to filter based on the different categories. But now it adds them as separate columns rather than aggregating them together like we had over here. This bar represents electric plus gas plus water. And when I added groceries back in, it includes groceries and all of that. When I move it over here to legends, it breaks it out to different columns. So actually, water's not that interesting because it's quarterly. I'm going to take that out. But what I said before seems to kind of bear out. You can see more gas during the summer months, or during the winter months when it's cold. Lots of electricity during the winter months too, because the lights are on more hours. And a lot less gas during the summer. That's because I haven't bought a gas grill yet, but that's on the agenda. So you can see different ways of breaking these down. You can also, as with anything, reorder these however you want. You can also look at my grocery bill over the course of the year. I think I threw some parties in May. That might be why. And you can play around with this data as well. Parking is high in the summer, and I bet the reason for that is going to... Well, okay, I bought all my Mets tickets in March, but I used them in July. So that's how you make pivot charts. Let's review what we've learned in this lesson. We looked at pivot tables, including creating and configuring pivot tables, adding calculated fields, and formatting data in pivot tables. We also looked at pivot charts. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this lesson.